Let's write our next Python program. Write a program to accept some values and store them in an array. Then read the array and print the numbers. Now, arrays, we have already seen the same problem statement with respect to lists. Now, the difference between lists and arrays are that in a list, you can store, as we have already seen, different types of data in a list. Whereas in an array, we can store only one type of data, right? So let's proceed. And when it comes to array, when it came to list, we could just say a list equal to this, right? But when it comes to an array, we have to import the array module. Now let's define a function to accept the values, and we will specify what is the size of the array going to be. So we have to first declare an array. So A is equal to array dot, no, not array, ARR, because we are referring to the array as ARR dot array. The first parameter to this function would be what type of data is going to be stored. So let us say I, that is integers. And then we give square brackets. So as of now, it is an empty array. Now for I in range maxi valid input. Okay, validations we will check later on. First, let's get the simplest first. Element is equal to input, enter a number. Okay, enter a number. And then what we'll do is we will add this at the end. A dot append what element. So we are adding this element to this array A, which we have declared it here. And then finally we will return this array. Okay, now let's define a function for print the values of the array. And this will take what? This will take say numbers and maxi. Let's print a blank line first, backslash n, and then we'll set up a loop for I in range maxi numbers ith element of the array numbers. So numbers is going to be an array, and we don't want it to go to the next line after printing it. We want it in the same line. So we will say end is equal to an empty space, and we will return. Again, one extra line is required here. Now let's define the main function. How many elements do we require? Int input how many numbers to input. Num array is equal to, and we will call the function accept values, and to this we will pass how many. So how many? Let's say we enter 5. So accept values will be called and 5 will be passed to it, and here this loop will repeat 5 times so that 5 numbers can be accepted, and that function will return an array that will be stored in num array. Okay, now what do we do now? We print the values. We call the function print values, and we pass num array. We will pass maxi, not maxi, how many, and finally we will call the main function, and here also we can say return, no issues. Now let's run this program and see. So let's first go to configuration. Let's change this function to this is not bill printing. So what do we do? This is actually arrays related. So let's rename this. So refactor, rename. and we will rename it to numbers in array. So you might have guessed the next problem that we are going to do is billing. Okay, anyhow. So now let's change the configuration and let's say uh, numbers in array. Okay. Now let's run this. How many numbers to input? Let's say three numbers. So now let's add these numbers. It has printed 45, 65, 67. But there is no spacing. So we have to provide some spacing while printing. So let's say now the moment we have to do that, we have to print it as a formatted string. We will say comma space, or instead of just giving space, let's give a comma so that the comma gets printed between numbers. Now let's run this again. Oh, there is a problem here now. This would be we have to close the quotation marks. So just make sure that you have two opening and two closing. Okay, let's run this. Four numbers, any four numbers you give. So 34, 54, 56, 76. Okay, I think you got the idea. Similarly, if you want a array of floats, then you have to change this to float, and here again when you are in accepting the values, we have changed it to float, and here any other changes that is required? I don't think so. Let's run this again. 4. So let's say 45.5. What does it say? Float object cannot be interpreted as an integer. So somewhere there is an error. Line 12. So let's go to 12. Okay. So here you see the type of array that we have declared is of type integer array. So we have to change this to float. And now if we run it, it will work. 0.5, say 0.8, some decimals. And let's just say what happens if we just type 54, which to us it is an int. Now the moment you say float, remember, because of floating point problems, it will display it like this. If you want it only in a single decimal, you will have to format it 0.0 f, or not 0, let's say 2 or 1, since we are talking of we are entering only one value. So let's see, 23.4 something 0.6 something else 0.2, and let's just say 45. So 23.4, 45.6, 56.2, and 45.0. Now the last one we entered it as an integer without decimal places, but it has converted it into float. Okay. Now if you want to enter a string, again you will have to make changes here, and you have to remove this float, because input is always gives you a string. Now, what happens if I say 4 and I say some values and then suddenly a string I enter, not a number? Again, it will give me a error. So, how do I make sure that only numbers are entered? So, what I'll have to do is the line which might give me an error, I put it in a try block. So first, let's say valid input is equal to false. And then I say while, I set up a loop so that only if the input is valid, then only I go to the next iteration of for loop. So while not valid input, I establish a try block. Try to run this. It might happen that an exception occurs. If an exception occurs, what should we do? So print enter only numbers. Valid type. Remember, else will be executed only if this statement was successful. So valid input is equal to true, so that it can come out of this while loop. And a dot append, and what do we append? Element. Okay, this was already there, so let's delete this. Now let's run this. Let's see what happens. Our input has to be float. Even if we enter int, it will convert it into float. So 45 point, no, let's say four numbers. 45.5, 23.67. Let's say wish. Now let's see what happens. Enter only numbers. Now it's supposed to accept two more values. Let's see whether it accepts two more values. So 65.4 temperature. Enter only numbers. So now we say 45. So it has entered 45.5, 23.7, 65.4, 45. So here, let's be more explicit. Error, enter only numbers. Now I have shown append because I want the numbers to be added to the end of the array. So it keeps adding it to the end. That means next number, next number, next number. But if I want to put it in between, then I have a function called insert. So just try out that functionality as well. That's it. Bye.